Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for being here. This is an amazing conference, always one of the highlights of the year. So this is joint work with Omid, Rafieian, who's right there, and Jesse, I was at Hong Kong. So as you can see from the title, it's somewhat of a dual theme in this paper. So the introduction is really going to follow the same structure pretty much. So I want to start from the privacy side. Right? The privacy is something we've heard a lot about in the last few years, both on the policy front and on the academic front. And it's actually one of the few issues in the US that has received bipartisan support. On the supply side, right, if we're studying what is privacy doing to, say, the New York Times, or even just a smaller kind of online blog, usually the focus has been on outcomes. And there's a couple of them that are of interest here. One is lower ad revenues for publishers. That shouldn't be surprising, right? I mean, probably one of the main reasons why online advertising works to the extent that it does is the ability of publishers to target ads in an extremely granular way. So of course, once you introduce some privacy regulation, that should decrease, and it does. And then there's some unintended consequences, like increased concentration among tech vendors. What is much less known is how this is changing not so much the outcomes, but the equilibrium strategies for these players. Now, turning on the polarization side, again, what I'm going to say here, I don't think is going to be overly surprising to a lot of people in the room, but it has long been speculated, over the last, I think, almost better part of 2 decades, that the internet and the hyper-personalization of the internet is to be blamed for political divide and polarization. And again, the reasoning is, a classic story that, people just enter and say an echo chamber, they're not exposed to views that are opposite to theirs, and therefore there's going to be a rise in political polarization. The evidence here is usually relational, and again, it kind of highlights the fact that political polarization has risen over the last couple of decades, and at the same time, content is becoming more and more. Little of this is empirically verified at a level of rigor that we would like, and there's been some skepticism over the last few years that this is actually the actual mechanism. Here's a quote that I think exemplifies this skepticism quite well. This is by Boxell, Gaskin, and Shapiro, and they're saying, I'm kind of paraphrasing here a bit, say maybe we're blaming the internet too much. If we're looking for something, to blame, it should be TV, which, as notably doesn't have nearly the same degree as personalization as the internet, but in their mind is more responsible for polarization than the internet is. So it was just, in terms of like these two themes that we're going to try and relate to each other, we think in a new way. So let me just give you a brief overview. We're giving a deeper look at the link between the ability to personalize or lack thereof and the incentive to polarize or differentiate. And we're going to suggest here that maybe we're getting this backwards, and in a way that I'm going to clarify as I go. So what we do here, I think this paper, Omid would tell the same. At some point we would like to test this empirically. I don't think we're there yet, purely in terms of where kind of privacy regulation is to begin with. But for now, what we're going to do is just a theoretical model describing how publishers adapt to privacy regulation. Okay, so to be a little bit more precise, we're studying 2 informational environments. The first one is behavioral targeting. The second one is contextual targeting. So just to clarify what these two are, so behavioral targeting, most notably with third-party cookies, works the following way. Like, let's say that Franz, I'm a media publisher. Franz is coming to my website. I want to show him an ad that's relevant for him. With behavioral targeting, I don't even care about what the content on my website is, because I can see via cookies every single website. Obviously, I'm taking this to the extreme, but I obtain a lot of information about Franz, and I can just target him with an ad that is specific to him. With contextual targeting, I don't see any of that. The only thing I know in that case is that Franz is visiting my website. So that's the only information I have. So this consumer self-selection is really the only thing that I can leverage to show ads that are as relevant as possible. The question that we're going to study is, once we go from an environment with no privacy, so where behavioral tracking is allowed, to one with privacy, where the only information you have about consumers is the only thing that's plain to see, meaning are they clicking on your link or not, will this increase or decrease the amount of polarization? Now, I'm going to go quick here in the interest of time. There's obviously a great, a big literature in this case. The first one is, kind of a general one on media markets and differentiation. Studying differentiation in media markets is not the same as in standard markets, because media markets are by their very nature two-sided, right? So if you're a media publisher, you kind of have a sort of 2 different platforms. One is the eyeballs, so the consumers, and one is, the ultimate kind of, beneficiaries, which are the advertisers. So consumers would push you to differentiate to increase profits, but at the same time, you want to create competition among advertisers that push you very much in the opposite way. Obviously, there's a big literature in online advertising. This is economics, CS, marketing, operations, so on and so forth. And more recently, although it goes way back to some extent, there's a literature on privacy. Okay, so we kind of borrow from all of these streams, but I think we managed to have a model that's very, very, very simple, almost kind of bare bones, you could say. So everything in this model exists on a 0-1 line. So again, this is a very, very simple framework. It's just a twist on a simple hoteling game. So there's 3 ideological positions on an issue: 0, 1 half, and 1. You can think of this as a kind of classic politics example, but it could be a little broader than that. I think in the paper we have an example with if the issue is animal rights, you might have an animal rights website and an anti-rifles, for sale website. So wherever the issue is, you can think about this a little bit more broadly than politics. There's 3 types of consumers. Again, 0, 1 half, and 1. The only thing we assume here is that they're in symmetric proportions. Lambda being the share of the two, of each of the 2 ideological positions. So still allows for flexibility for issues that are very polarized, like most issues in the US right now. You could have, again, 49, 249, or other issues, you might have, most of the mass in the middle and very few ideological consumers there. So you can think of Lambda simply as a measure of ideological partisanship. Media publishers, as I said, everything is in 0-1. Content is also there, so they can choose whether they want to be ideological or whether they want to stay in the middle. For the monopoly case, we don't even need the 3 positions. We could just do 1 half and 0, but we kind of use a unified thing, and then we're going to move to duopoly later on. The only thing that's continuous here, it's ads. It can be chosen as anywhere between 0 and 1. The reason for why we need that is going to become clear, I think, very soon. All right, let's start from the consumer side here. Very, very standard utility function here. So our consumers, again, are indexed by data. That's their type, that's their ideological preference. X is the type of content that they're consuming. So the first piece, here it's just 1 half, so it doesn't really do much. But the first piece is vertical quality. We normalize it to 1 half here because it makes the model just easier to present. It doesn't really do much, but you can think of that first part as SQ. Everyone likes that, obviously. The second part is just a standard measure of ideological misalignment. So you can think of this as consumers have a preference for some sort of echo chamber, but they have some flexibility as well. The last part is just an idiosyncratic preference. So conditional on your ideology, conditional on the content, you might like something more or less. A couple of assumptions here just to make sure that everything works out. But again, nothing to spend too much time on. Couple of things to note is here. Really, one, I think, is the main one, is the utility depends on content and doesn't depend on ads. So ads are what makes this whole thing work, go around, because that's what the media publisher is using to make money. So of course, it's going to shape the strategy. It doesn't really enter consumer utilities. You could think of situations where consumers are also influenced by what they see ad-wise. There's a lot of research that shows that at the very least, the X has a way bigger impact than A of X. So as an approximation, they only care about content. They don't care about ads. And just to simplify, outside also normalized to 0. Okay. So this is, again, very, very standard, as I said, just an hoteling game read. So let's talk about publishers. This is a little bit richer. So publishers, of course, care about 2 things. They care about maximizing the number of eyeballs, conditional on the advertising profits that they can make on those eyeballs. So it really boils down to how we model the second part, which is how do you profit from ads when you decide a certain content X. You can be a centrist, you can be far right, you can be left, and you're going to show us that are associated to that. The way we think about this is once you select a content X, this is going to induce a posterior of consumer data X, and then we're interested in the average match between those consumers and an ad. Just to make this a little bit more practical, in the paper we use this. It's a very standard kind of quadratic loss function. So the way we think of this is, perfect match would be the 1. That's just a normalization, of course. And then there's going to be a quadratic loss that measures kind of the mismatch between the consumer and an ad. This can grow large. Again, if you're attracting a vegan consumer, you're showing a steak ad, that's not going to go great. So in principle, if gamma is large, you could even have this negative. So it's not just a CDR. It could be more general than that. And again, gamma here is a super important parameter. If gamma is 0, nothing matters. There's no need to target in any way. If gamma is very large, then it's very, very important that you have a precise idea of who's coming to your website and who's not. Two very different informational regimes, the pre-privacy one and the post-privacy one. We take both of them to the extreme, I would say, especially the first. So behavioral targeting here is about as extreme as it gets. With behavioral targeting, you simply know everything about everyone. So what you're producing in terms of content should just maximize the number of eyeballs because ads are going to work. And they're going to work because you can just show every single person a different ad that works for them. So once again, if Francis is coming to my website, I don't need to know, why is on my website or what I'm producing as a media publisher. All I need to know is this type, which I do, and I'm going to show an ad that perfectly matches that. Okay. So here, content and ad choices are completely separate. There is no dependence on X, as you can see. The opposite, of course, is true with contextual targeting. In this case, you don't know anything about anyone apart from the fact that they're there. Really, the self-selection is the only piece of information that you have. And so that's kind of the leverage that the platform has when it's trying to decide on different strategies, right? This particular case, it's immediate to see that, for a given piece of content, you're just going to show one ad because, again, you have no idea who's who, right? If Marco and Franz are coming to my website, I have no idea of disentangling who's who. So whatever posterior distribution I have, I'm going to show something that's a good match on average, and that's about it. In this particular situation, this is a joint maximization problem between content and ads. All right, a little bit of math on this slide just to, I think, clarify. I think the quadratic stuff buys us, I think, a decent amount of tractability. So in the first situation, as I said, the match is always perfect because behavioral targeting here works perfectly. We really took it to the extreme. And so all you need to do is maximize eyeballs. That's a very kind of simple and to some extent boring strategy. The contextual targeting one is much more interesting because in that particular case, what's really going to matter is how much are you losing on average from this quadratic loss function. It's well known that you're trying to pick an AX that minimizes that quantity. Of course, the AX is going to be the posterior expectation of theta. So once you do that, this thing becomes the variance, and you kind of have this very simple expression relating your profits and consumer privacy, which is the higher the exposed consumer privacy, the lower your profits are going to be, which should make sense because, of course, all you care about is inference, and consumers having privacy means that you have limited ability to do that. And again, this is going to be moderated by how important is it to mistarget, right? This is going to be heavily kind of website dependent. It's going to be very different in different situations. All right. So results, monopoly. This is kind of the one message in the paper, I would say. We do this for both monopoly and duopoly. There are some twists, but I think, for the most part, this is it. If targeting matters enough, and if consumers are ideological enough, so there's some boundaries, both of those are important, plus a technical condition that doesn't really matter here, then abandoning behavioral tracking will push the publisher towards more extreme content. Okay, so even if the publisher was producing mainstream content optimal with behavioral tracking, once that is banned, there's a push towards the extremes. So the intuition here, of course, all you care about is minimizing the variance of that posterior, and that's achieved by becoming more and more ideological. So if you go to 1/2, you might again have a lot of consumers. It's going to be a symmetric distribution, but it's going to have two tails. And so on average, your match between the ads and the consumers is going to be poor. Okay, so you can think of this as a less is more, kind of trading off quantity for quality diversity. So if we were presenting this paper in only one slide, this would be the slide. There is no math, but it kind of shows the different way to think about this. So this is kind of the well-studied link is less privacy leads to more polarization. And it's something like this. Less privacy means that increased opportunity for extremely granular, personalization, echo chambers, consumers only exposed to things that confirm their views, and as a result, more polarization, right? Couple things to notice here. The first one is polarization the cause or the effect? It feels to us that in this case the pre-existing differences are really was driving content differentiation more so than the other way around. So what we're suggesting is kind of a complementary perspective that should, maybe more privacy can also lead to more polarization, right? So more privacy means, by definition, either inference platform has to rely on consumer self-selection, and the way you do that, what that means is that now you have inferential motives in content design. You're just not maximizing clicks. You're trying to learn as much as you can. And so as a result, you do that by producing more niche content, right? So polarization here is supply side driven. Unlike in the first link where it's very much demand driven, And the second thing I want to kind of highlight is that this is all about what the firm wants to know or wants to learn. Whereas in the first part, what about the firm knows already. Okay. All right, duopoly. I think I'm very short on time, so I'm just going to kind of breeze through this. We just wanted to confirm that this wasn't an artifact of looking at a monopoly, so we repeat the same thing with two firms. The proposition is a little messy, so I like to show this graphically. We just like compare equilibria in the behavioral hard targeting case and in the contextual hard targeting case. Two axes. This one is the measure of ideological partisanship. So it starts at 1/3 because that's where the interesting cases start. You go to 1/2. That's the importance of targeting in the first place. There is no action on the y-axis here because there's no mistargeting. So that parameter always multiplies to 0. So the whole point is how polarized are consumers to begin with. Things change quite a bit once you go here. Of course, the stripe region says this is going to be more polarized under both monopoly and duopoly. The second part is saying, oh, sorry. This blue part is saying there's going to be an additional push. Again, you should think of this as a diff and diff, so to speak. If there was like an empirical test for this, it would be kind of diff and diff. This is a situation where this is true under duopoly, but it wasn't true under monopoly to begin with. So the message in some sense is repeated. Again, want to emphasize this is not just saying, there's more differentiation in duopoly. Yes, of course, but there's also kind of additional forces in that direction, right? The second thing to notice is that prices, again, put it in quote, but prices increase. The reason being, of course, you can give more confidence to advertisers because now if a consumer is coming to you, they didn't just pick you over an outside option, they picked you over something else. So it's a finer partition, a finer segmentation, which causes higher prices. Couple of caveats here. We're not really modeling that side of the market. It's a very simple model on that side. The second caveat is that if we were looking at prices in the more traditional sense, let's say subscription prices, then of course they would follow a more standard logic. But the same point would remain, right? You still want to have higher prices because that causes a stronger selection of types, and that gives confidence to advertisers. Okay, so conclusions. We study how changes in privacy regulation affect kind of content design and the associated prices in the ad market. And what we highlight is that following a ban in behavioral advertising, behavioral tracking, platforms have to rely on self-selection. How do you do that? You try and make that self-selection as powerful, as strong as possible, okay? As a result, I didn't really talk about this, but of course, there's an under-provision of mainstream content, even in situations where these content would maximize consumer welfare and would maximize demand, because it still wouldn't maximize profits given the level of uncertainty left. So just to conclude, probably many of you are familiar with this stream of papers that came out of Facebook last summer, where the message was, it's the people, it's not the algorithm, right? Do not blame the algorithm for polarization. This is really about consumer preferences. In some sense, we're saying that too, right? We're saying, it's not hyper-personalization fault, but we had a very important caveat, which is what's driving everything here is very much supply-driven, is the desire for the platform to optimize, ad revenue, which is done by creating niche and polarizing content. So I think it's we think it's like a potentially important side effect for this. All right, I'm out of time, so thank you very much.